snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I am here today for a very exciting joint book review, because this is the review of book 2, 3 and 4 in the Otherland series. Now there are only 4 books in the series. I have already reviewed the first one, which was a super duper rave review. I'll put a link to that below if you want to go and check that one out before you watch this, but this won't have any spoilers, so don't worry about that. Let's get started. The first one I'm going to be talking about is Otherland Volume 2, which is River of Blue Fire. This is by Tad Williams, and I read the first one of this series and I instantly wanted to go on to the second, which is always a good sign because I don't actually marathon series very often. However, this series I went straight from book 1 to book 2 to book 3 to book 4, and I loved all of them so much. The second book in this series I ended up giving a 5 out of 5 stars to, because it was just such a good development from the first one. The first one feels like a really interesting beginning to the story, but the second one really expands upon all of the things that we've learned by the end of the first. I don't think that we really knew enough about the world to completely grasp everything in the first book, and Tad Williams has said that he considers the Otherland series, all 4 books, to basically be one continuous story that, because of its sheer length, just had to be divided into 4 parts. And I would definitely agree with that assessment. I do think that this is a series that is fantastic as a collection, but probably the first book doesn't work as well on its own. However, I think this book does kind of work on its own. I mean, you do have to have the experience of having read the first. You couldn't just dive in at this book, it wouldn't make sense. But I do think that this is an exceptionally wonderful world. Basically, this world is a world where the net is a big deal. Virtual reality has taken over, and everyone in the world, no matter what country or what place they're in, has some sort of access to the net, even if it is very limited. The net is essentially virtual reality. Most of the time you can tell that you're in virtual reality, but sometimes you come across simulations that are very realistic and very exciting. And in the first book we follow a group of different people from all over the world, with a couple of major characters, one of which is Rini and the other one is Zabu, and the 2 of them together basically are our main characters, although there are plenty of others who come into the storyline, and we follow them as they get entrenched in this plot surrounding the net and surrounding specifically Otherland, which is this other network full of worlds that have been created by these godlike creatures, or people who essentially are gods because of what they've created, and they're very old. Technology in this world has allowed people to extend their lives for a lot longer, and we basically just have an advanced state of technology, but of course death is still a thing, and so the gods within this are attempting to make their own world so they can extend their lives. But you kind of get hints of it in the first book, and then as it goes on in the second book, third and fourth, you start to realise an awful lot more about how they've done this, what they're doing it for, why they're doing it, and it's just so fascinating. I will say in this book, Martine, who is a character that we meet, I think, in the first book, but we don't really get to understand her point of view, she became such an interesting character for me in this book, and I think I really started to understand her a bit more. She's always been an interesting character, and she's always been someone I liked, but I couldn't have said that I fully understood her plight and her story until this book, where she starts to leave diary entries, and the diary entries that Martine leaves are fascinating, and they really play into the overall story later on as well. It's just such an interesting world, and I think all of the characters in this are beautifully developed, absolutely beautifully developed. It is a really long series. I mean, each book, there are only 4 books, but each book is like 900 plus pages, most of them. I just think that this series is honestly like my replacement for Wheel of Time, and I don't say that they're anything alike, because they're not, but in terms of a big epic fantasy series, I was missing that, and although I have Malazan on the go, I've been reading the Esselmont books and I've not been enjoying them. So in terms of a really great series that I was loving and just wanted to dive headfirst into, this series completely replaced Wheel of Time for me, but this is a sci-fi series because it has this focus of the net. Now the net is a really interesting place because the net has potential to make anything. Anything can be made on the net if you can envision it and you can work out how to do it. So that gives potential for fantastical crossovers. We get worlds that these characters go to that they are basically in a fairy tale. So their world is completely inspired by Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz or something like that, which is really, really cool. We also have worlds that are just completely weird, like worlds that have gigantic insects buzzing around. Very weird, very cool, very exciting. And worlds where people are just numbers and slaves and they have to work for the overlord of that world. Basically, the net and the Otherland network in particular has such an advanced state that you can essentially live in these worlds. People have these suits that will feed them nutrients, and so they can just stay completely immersed in VR for hours, days, months, years even. It's absolutely awesome as a concept, and it works so well because Ted Williams knows what he's doing, and he just gets how to develop people and develop characters and just do it in such a good way. And the plot and the cast is fantastic as well. So for this one, I've already said I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It continued the story beautifully, and we find out a bit more about the river and what the river is, as you can kind of tell from the title. The river is hugely important in the story, and when we found out what that was, it was a revelation moment for me because I was like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. So definitely something to watch out for if you are reading the series. Third one in the series is absolutely chunky as can be. This one is Mountain of Black Glass, and I really, really like this one still, but I didn't like it quite as much as the second one, which was my favourite one for the time being. However, that does not by any means mean I didn't like this. I still loved it, I just didn't love it quite as much, so I didn't quite get that 5-star. But honestly, this is fantastic. In this one, we find out a lot more about Paul Jonas, which is fantastic because Paul Jonas is a sort of drifting character. He's not really related to most of the other characters for most of the first 2 books. He doesn't really connect with them, really. You don't see him cross paths with them. But his story is so interesting because he's constantly adrift. He's constantly on his own, sort of drifting around the universes, drifting from one world to the next where disaster strikes and he has to move on, and another disaster strikes, or he's being hunted by people and he doesn't know why. Paul's story is so tragic the whole way through because he is confused about his own life. He doesn't even know why he's in this network. He doesn't understand how he got there, and he doesn't remember any of his past, so he can't even think how he can get out of the network and get back to his home. He doesn't know anything much about himself. He's just going through the motions, going through the simulations and trying to escape. And our main cast of characters, Rini, Zabu, T3B, Martine, and loads of other characters are all also going through the simulations, but they're going through different worlds at different times to Paul. We constantly have the groups getting split by horrible, tragic things that go on, and we constantly have people reuniting again. We managed to find things that can help people teleport to places and manipulate the network a little bit more in this book, which is cool, and we also learn a lot more about Paul and his history, and also some of his memory does start to return in this book, and that reveals an awful lot more about the general network and how it's all been made and put together. Emily was also a character who came in, I think in the second book, and fascinated me as a character because I was so bemused by what she was there for. I didn't really understand fully until it's revealed what she's there for, and it's just such an interesting thing because I think Ted Williams had this whole story plotted out in his mind before he wrote all 4 books, and I don't feel like it's like an inconsistency from each book. You pick up every book from the very end of the last book. It doesn't feel like there's any disconnect at all. It's just one continuous story. And this book, you also learn a lot more about the Grail and what that is, which is something that we've been hinting at for quite a lot of the story. We've been hearing that there's this Grail project. We don't know what it is. We don't know who they are. You also learn about the Circle, who are another group of people that we don't really fully know that much about, but we learn a lot more about them in this one. And it's just fantastic. Like, honestly, I don't know if I'm getting across how much I enjoy this, but I do love this series, and I think this book was just so fun, so interesting, and revealed a lot, but didn't fully tie up anything, so that's why I didn't quite get that 5-star rating, but I still would give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's still very close to a 5-star rating, so do not be disheartened by the fact I haven't given it 5. And then the final book, which I literally just finished and I loved to pieces, is Otherland Volume 4, Sea of Silver Light. And this one, besides being a purple, shiny, metallic, beautiful cover, like look at that, it's really cool. Besides that, it's fantastic. It's my favourite one in the series because it's the biggest, it's the chunkiest, but it's fantastically good and it reveals so much, so many of the answers that we've been holding out on and looking for and trying to uncover get revealed in this. Everything gets revealed. I do not feel like there are any loose ends that still needed tying up, and I really appreciate that, because I hate when you get to the end of a series and you still feel like, well, what happened to so-and-so? None of that is a problem in here. It's all explained. Everything, everyone's storyline is explained and finished and finalised, and I loved that. And we also just have such an epic adventure still in this one. Like, the whole way through the second and third book, they're journeying around the world, and even in a lot of this book, they're still journeying around. Within that, we have so many connections being made between the characters. We have people who are forming relationships, we have people who are discovering more about themselves from being isolated. Orlando and Fredericks are a character duo that I just find so fun, and I love them, and there were some really heartbreaking moments with them in these books. There were so many good moments. There are so many things that I know I'm not going to remember to talk about, and it's going to frustrate me no end, because I love this so much. I just want to, like, chat about it forever. I also really love the stories that Zabu tells, and also just the general theme of stories and childhood throughout the whole series. This references a lot of fairy tales, a lot of nursery rhymes, a lot of different childhood stories, and a lot of cultural stories as well, which is fantastically interesting. And Zabu, our main character, is an ex-Busherman. He was from the Busherman tribes in South Africa, and then he moved into the towns, and that's where he met Rini, who became his tutor and led him into this adventure on the net. Basically, the whole story is about these people from all over the world noticing that other people who they're friends with or loved ones of theirs seem to be going into these mysterious comas whilst connected onto the net, and no one really knows why people are going into comas, but they know that it's something to do with the net because it seems like it is a common theme, although they can't connect with that many people and no one will diagnose it specifically. We also have the character of Sellers and Christabel and Olga, who are all other characters going on outside. Christabel and Sellers I found fascinating the whole way through. Like, Christabel's been one of my favourite characters for quite a lot of the series, as has Orlando and Fredericks and Rini and Zabu. I love them all, like, so much. But Christabel's relationship is really interesting with the rest of the characters because she is a very, very young child, and so she's very naive. She doesn't understand a lot of what is going on. She doesn't understand why she's being manipulated by adults, and she has to kind of try and process a lot of the things that are happening. We know why they're happening as a reader, but seeing it through the eyes of a young child, I thought Tad Williams did that so convincingly. That voice, that narration, felt like a young child really was telling you the story, and I loved it so much. There's just so many facets to this. We also have a murder investigation that's going on, which is being done by Calliope, and also we have two characters called Dread and Dulcie who are working against the network. They're trying to hack in. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Like, you have the people on the network and then you have all the people outside of it. We also have Long Joseph and Jeremiah, who are outside the network, and they are trapped in a military base where people are trying to break in and invade them. So that's also very exciting. There's just so much going on in this series, guys. Honest to God, it is such a good series, and I can't tell you everything because I don't want to spoil any of it, but I have to just say that this is such a good series overall, and it was such a satisfying series overall. Would 100% recommend these, like all of the ones in the series. So these are all of the books in the series. The yellow one is the first, the blue is the second, the red is the third, and the purplish one is the fourth. I have loved every single one. I gave the first one a 3.5, although I would give it higher had it had more of a conclusive ending, but at the time I didn't know it was one continuous story and that's how it was intended, so now I would probably, looking back on it, give it at least a 4. The second one I gave a 5, the third one I gave a 4.5, and the fourth one I gave a 5. So, I mean, that is a representation of how much this series means to me. I loved it, I thought it was fantastic, and I would hugely, hugely, hugely recommend that you all check this out. It is so good. Now I'm going to put them down because they are hurting my hands. They're all so heavy. Basically, just, you should read them because I love them, and I would highly recommend this series to anyone who likes good, long, epic, awesome stuff with so many cool ideas, so many great moments, so many great characters, so much great development of characters. It is slow moving, but it's so worth it. It's so good. Annoyingly, I have one cover that isn't the same. Damn it. Oh well. Never mind. Thank you all for watching. This has been a muddled, mixed-up review of the Otherland series generally, predominantly the last 3 in the series because I've already reviewed the first. Let me know below whether you've read this series, what you thought of it, or if you haven't read it, please go and read it and then come back and chat to me about it because I've loved it so much. The audiobooks, I will also note, are fantastic. I listened to all of these on audio, although I did read along with the audio sometimes, and I switched to just reading sometimes, mostly because I was commuting at the time of reading them into London and back. I mostly listened to this on audio, and I think the narrator on the American Audible site is absolutely fantastic, so I would hugely recommend you guys check that out if you haven't already. That is it. Those are my reviews for the final 3 in the Otherland series. Let me know below your thoughts. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.